All right, so let's get into it. The hooded figures of World of Warcraft. This was a very, very requested discussion. Most people want to talk about these hooded figures. And for those of you that is literally now joining the stream going, hooded figures, what the fuck's this guy talking about? Welcome to World of Warcraft. They've been around since TBC, actually earlier, but we'll pretend that Warcraft 3 never happened, and we'll say that they've been around since TBC, right?
Technically, haven't they actually been around since Classic? Because of the portal in what's the zone? The one under Thunderbluff in the Barrens.
There is a hooded figure there, I think.
Fuck it, someone will correct me. It's the internet.
Well, let's just say it's from Classic TBC era, right? Let's just say that. But these hooded figures, the hooded guys, have been literally everywhere, right? And we've never received any information as to where they come from. We've never been told, but we did get something very interesting in 9.1 around a figurine.
Yeah.
That whispers. And it happens to be called the hooded figurine, right? And it looks exactly like one of these hooded figures. So why would an artifact like that be in Korthia? And more specifically, where could it be from?
So, I mean, the original held theory on those was that it was the Diablo crossover, right? It was the reference to the other game. And I liked that. That was cool. Because there's a lot of crossovers and a lot of Easter eggs and references to the other franchises.
Yeah.
But now they're making it into something bigger. And I think we've actually interacted with them before. In the BFA Vol'jin questline, when these ghosts and spirits are trying to haul him back to the Maw, they're the same thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they actually are, because they're obviously a race or a species of something, but they're not like godly beings.
Well, they're either a race or a species, or they're a representation of gods, right? They are, as far as I can tell. Now, this is where we get sort of into why were they used? We know that the Dark Portal was built, right? It was built by Sargeras' demons, and on Azeroth's side, very similar, right? The orcs basically built both of these, but they managed to, or they placed these hooded figurines on both of them. Yeah. This should have come from Sargeras, right? Or the Nathrezim, because the Nathrezim would have had some hand in this, shall we say, layout, right? The design of these. Now, I sort of like the fact that it is the Nathrezim and that it is sort of their representation, just because the Nathrezim is meant to be the unseen guests, right? And if you think of hooded figure, you think of something that, doesn't show its face. That would be an unseen guest, if you will, right? Assassins are usually shown with, hooded robes, not showing their faces.
To an extent, yeah. I don't know about the Nathrezim, though, because, as I said, we encounter them in their spirit form as they're trying to cut off Vol'jin. So, is that dead Nathrezim then, or is that them spirit walking somehow?
No, I don't. I like the theory that it could be sort of inspired by the Nathrezim, and that the Nathrezim use this as sort of their calling card, right? I like the theory of that. This, however, brings a bit of a problem, because Torghast has these figures as well. Now, based on what we know, the Nathrezim would probably not have been around by the time Torghast was built.
Yeah.
Considering Torghast is quite fucking old, right? So that is somewhat of a problem. And just very quickly for everyone in chat, Kat, because I see you asking, the theory about the crow in Oribos, we covered that about 2 months and maybe almost 2.5 months ago, right here on the Shill Show. So we did cover that quite a long time ago already. I think it was like 2.5 months ago at this point.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point where certain content creators, you can almost guarantee whenever they've got this big revelation, you can go back on many other content creators' channels and find them months earlier.
Yeah. I mean,
Almost
everyone,
word for word.
I'm not saying that there's any sort of content stealing or whatever. That's not what I'm suggesting. I don't think Balila needs to steal any content from me at all. He's got an entire writing team behind him. But it's more a reflection of what is happening in World of Warcraft. At some point, all content creators will reach the same conclusions about everything in the game, right?
Yeah.
It just matters who gets there first. Or in my case, it doesn't even matter that I get there first because no one's going to fucking know I said it and then come back at me 2 months later and be like, oh, did you see what this guy just said? And I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake. Did no one watch my videos?
I am waiting for the Malfurion's dead video. I'm not going to lie. Like, as soon as that comes out, I'm just going to be like, yeah, who would have guessed, mate?
But okay, so the hooded figures, the other option, right, for the hooded figures is the first ones. Now, the first ones make more sense, considering that Torghast, I don't believe, was originally built to be a prison. I think Torghast was originally built very similar to what Oribos is now. It was originally built to be the thing that captured the souls, to be the sort of conduit that drags souls into it. And it's clear that that's exactly what it does, right? Souls fall through the veil into the soul stream. The soul stream then runs through Oribos, but funnily enough, when the Arbiter, when she doesn't sort of direct souls, they go straight into the River Gargua, and the River Gargua flows straight into Torghast. Doesn't skip a beat. There's no sort of offshoot for souls. There's no sort of way out. That is the natural flow of the soul stream. For what reason? For what purpose? If Oribos was indeed natural, and it should have been there from the very beginning, wouldn't the souls then just flow into the fucking nether? Why is it that the souls flow straight into the River Gargua? That's all the proof you should need to determine that Oribos is an unnatural construct.
Yeah. It's something we said ever since that first cinematic, was that it looks like somebody's just put in this filter and put in like a processing plant in the middle of this river, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, you see it in Torghast. You do. As soon as you go into that central dome, like that central area, just in the center, you've got this big funnel of souls, and it looks natural.
See, I think... So I've been sort of going back and forth on this theory for a while. And I realize we're not actually talking about the hooded figures right now. But the hooded figures, in order to understand them, you have to sort of understand the first ones and their plan first. So I've been thinking about Zovaal, right? He's said to be a Titan ++, more powerful than any of his brothers and sisters. They consistently reiterate this. They make it very clear if he's ever allowed to escape the Maw, they cannot stop him, even with their combined might. The last time they were barely able to beat him, right? But how did they beat him? They beat him by tying him into the Maw. How did they get him to the Maw? Well, what if he was always there? What if all of them were once there? So they all ruled from the Maw, from Torghast. This was the original Oribos, so to speak. So the only way for them to basically keep him there was for them to leave and to tie him into the Shadowlands. So the Maw is the original starting point or the end point for souls. They all flow into the Maw. From the Maw, the River Gargua flows into Torghast. This is where the souls were judged by Zovaal. We now know, thanks to the Grimoire of the Shadowlands. For those of you that don't know, the Grimoire of the Shadowlands confirms that Zovaal is the original Arbiter. The Primus confirms this as well. He was the original Arbiter, right? He stood and he judged all souls until such time that he became corrupt and then suddenly wanted to do a bunch of other things. There's another interesting thing about the Maw that I think a lot of people missed from our coverage of the Shadowlands, or the Grimoire of the Shadowlands and beyond, last week. The Maw is the only zone in the Shadowlands that the brokers have no idea who built it. No idea. In fact, they go so far as to wonder, why is it possible? Why is there first one relics in the Maw? Like, they don't even quite understand that. Like, what's the first one relics doing there?
Yeah. And I mean, like we spoke about this last week with it basically being the fail-safe for the prophecy, right? For the original Maw Walker to get out. But I don't know. As we said earlier, there's a lot more questions in 9.0, 9.1 than there have been in any other expansion start. And I don't think we're getting the answers anytime soon, because I don't think they know the answers and where they want to go with it. But it all seems disjointed. Nothing seems to line up to a nice, neat theory. There's, no matter what we come up with, even we can pick holes in it. So,
true.
I don't know.
I personally believe the hooded figures, and this is why I said it's important for you to understand it first and foremost. I don't think the Maw was built by the first ones. I think Oribos was built by the first ones, or at least inspired by the first ones. I think the Maw and Torghast predates the Eternal Ones by quite some centuries. I think those figures, the hooded figures, is the other. Now, I'm sure most of you don't want to get me back into the 6, that is 1, that is 6, that is 7, that is 3, that is 6, that is 1, and then the other. So, the other, those are the hooded figures.
So, it's possible. It is definitely very possible that they represent the one outside the system, right? But that doesn't explain their other appearances. I mean, why would the other, the one that's outside the system, be in our system and deified without knowing who they are? Because you don't build statues out of somebody that you don't know.
Think about everywhere those statues show up. They're almost all built by beings that is against the current system.
Not true. Because they're on Draenor and in the Grand.
Yeah?
And orcs are pretty happy with the current system.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of arguments to be made. But yes, they are on Alternative Draenor. But we also have to understand, or have to remember, that Alternative Draenor is in a timeline that is not considered to be the real timeline. And so it may have been a timeline that wasn't cleansed by the first one's minions. So it was a timeline that before the first ones were able to take control of the universe.
I mean, they are also on Outland, so they were on our Draenor as well.
Yeah, mostly
in the
cleansed,
main timeline.
And we see them primarily on the structures, the portals. That's where they show up most significantly. They're in Torghast.
The highest concentration of them is actually south of Nagrand on the floating rocks. Because it was one of the things that actually led me into the whole Draenor equals Azeroth theory. It was one of the leaping points as to why these things were in Nagrand, not near the Dark Portal, and yet were still being revered and deified, when the only thing close by is the burial rites area for fallen orcs.
But here's still
to go into the Shadowlands.
So my reasoning for thinking that this is the other and not the first ones, but the first one's opposition, or whatever you want to call it, it stands to reason, right? That these things were built by someone at some point, obviously being worshipped by the person that built them, right? Or the society that built them must have worshipped them in some way, shape, or form. Yet that worship seems to have not continued, right? Either the ogres or the orcs built those hooded figures, right? Yet we do not see them repeat the process on Azeroth. When the orcs finally arrive in Azeroth, they do not repeat the process. They don't build those statues in Orgrimmar, right? The ogres that we meet don't seem to rebuild those statues anywhere, but they were once built. So these are gods that are either forgotten or have been defeated.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I do think they are a forgotten god, if that's the way they're going with, but I'm not sure it makes sense that it would be the one outside the system. I think it would actually be a pantheon that have maybe lost their humanoid forms, which would actually lead me to the light.
The light.
Well, as was pointed out in chat as well, but in Nagrand, the only thing that's really of any power is Oshigan, which had a Naru in it. Every time you find one of the portals, it has Naru nearby or Naru interference nearby.
Okay.
Even time travel itself is heavily used by Naru and heavily influenced by them. So if the Naru have been changed form-wise from what they once were, or from who created them as humanoid forms, then what form did they have previously? Because they can't have just permanently been wind chimes.
It depends, of course, but that's definitely a good point. And one that I can absolutely see. I do think the light's the next sort of frontier. I think the light's the next sort of power that we're going to have to dive into. Because there's Naru, but the Naru must serve something. Right? There must be a something that they serve. And it's entirely possible that the Naru serve these hooded figures, or that they themselves are the hooded figures. But that then just leads more into my theory that Zovaal is Anshe. That Zovaal is the original god of light. And that through some form or another, Zovaal was changed. And I'm not saying that this is true, but there is at least some evidence that backs it up. Of course, there's also evidence that completely strikes it down. So you have to basically pick a side and then wait for Blizzard to decide which side is the correct one to fall on.
Like, for me personally, I actually think Zovaal is the darkness that wounded Anshe. I think that's more going to be what it is.